Just met a guy with money, style, and zero limits. He says he's gonna change my whole world. How? Honestly, I think I just hit the jackpot.
For years, Arvind Sethi lived with his wife, Kavita, and their 2 children in a modest townhouse in Chicago's West Ridge neighborhood. On their life looked ordinary. Kavita worked part-time at a dental clinic, 8-year-old Neil attended the local elementary school, and 5-year-old Dia stayed in an after-school program until Arvind picked her up. Inside the home, however, tension had been building for a long time. Arvind rarely discussed money, avoided sharing bank information, and dismissed Kavita's concerns whenever she asked why bills kept arriving late or why his paychecks fluctuated. Kavita tried to keep stability for the children, but she sensed that her husband was hiding more than financial stress. Arvind's job as a contract driver for a private executive transport service allowed him to maintain an appearance very different from the one at home. Each morning he dressed in a crisp charcoal uniform, polished his shoes, and left the house early to collect the company's premium sedan from a downtown garage. His main client, a finance consultant, expected precise timing, spotless presentation, and professional conduct. Arvind performed these duties well. He carried garment bags to dry cleaners, moved briefcases between meetings, and learned the polite, controlled tone expected in luxury transportation. These routines created a believable image of stability and upward mobility, especially to anyone who saw him around high-end buildings or hotel entrances. At home, Kavita occasionally asked why he needed to keep the uniform on even after work, and why he never mentioned coworkers or office events. Arvind always had quick explanations: long hours, strict company rules, confidential clients. When he came home late, he claimed there had been delays downtown. When Kavita tried to check the family credit accounts, she found passwords changed. Arvind insisted everything was under control, though the number of unopened envelopes on his desk kept growing. His social media added another layer of performance. Arvind posted photos that looked polished and intentional, stepping out of the sedan, carrying designer garment bags, standing beside tall office buildings. He avoided posting anything inside the family home or anything that showed his real financial situation. Kavita noticed that his online image barely included her or the children. When she mentioned it, Arvind replied that the account was professional, though Kavita felt increasingly excluded. Arvind's work environment fed the illusion he cultivated. People who saw him with the sedan assumed he belonged to a higher income bracket. Hotel staff addressed him respectfully. Office employees greeted him as if he were tied to the finance world. The visual association with wealth made Arvind feel validated in ways he did not experience at home, where financial responsibility, childcare, and household planning exposed gaps he could not hide. The turning point in the family dynamic aligned with a gradual shift in Arvind's daily routine. He began returning home later, claiming the consultant's schedule had expanded. Kavita found this strange because his paychecks did not increase. He spent more time on his phone, stepped outside to take calls, and avoided sitting with the children at dinner. Neil asked why his father missed weekend outings. Dia began refusing to talk on the phone when Arvind called from work. Kavita confronted him one evening, demanding clarity about their budget and asking why his credit card bills had tripled. Arvind brushed her off, saying she was overreacting and that he was handling everything. Around this period, Arvind met 26-year-old graduate student Riya Talwar. They matched on a dating app after Arvind began using it during long waits in parking garages between client appointments. Their initial conversations were short and unremarkable, but Riya quickly noticed his polished appearance and assumed it reflected a comfortable lifestyle. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Arvind encouraged this belief, hinting vaguely at executive work, never mentioning a wife or children. To him, the attention felt like a reset, a chance to present himself without the weight of overdue bills or arguments. He continued living with Kavita and the children, but his schedule shifted even further. He left earlier, returned later, and became defensive when Kavita questioned the changes. She observed new clothing items he claimed were required by the company, as well as unfamiliar restaurant receipts in his pockets. Arvind insisted everything could be explained, yet none of his explanations matched the numbers on their bank statements. Each new inconsistency deepened the distance in the household. Kavita sensed that something fundamental in their relationship had changed, but she did not know how far the situation had already progressed. For the moment, all she had were unanswered questions, unexplained expenses, and a husband whose daily life seemed to be drifting somewhere she could no longer follow. In the weeks that followed, Kavita paid closer attention to Arvind's daily routine. What she had initially dismissed as irregularities became consistent patterns she could no longer rationalize. He began leaving the house well before sunrise, sometimes without eating breakfast, claiming the consultant needed early pickups. When she asked why these changes had not been mentioned by the company, he answered in short fragments, saying only that client travel has picked up or that there's a new schedule. His pay statements, however, remained unchanged, showing no overtime or additional compensation. This discrepancy stood out to Kavita as the first objective sign that something was wrong. Arvind's behavior inside the home reinforced her concerns. He spent more time in the hallway or outside the front door making calls, speaking quietly and turning away whenever she approached. When she asked whom he was talking to so late at night, he replied that dispatch often needed last-minute confirmations. Kavita knew from previous years that dispatch rarely called after working hours. His answers were becoming less consistent, and he no longer attempted to offer detailed explanations. Financial strain added pressure to the household. Kavita discovered that 2 automatic payments for utilities had failed. When she logged into the bank account, she saw the balance had dropped significantly. She printed the statement and confronted Arvind in the kitchen. Instead of addressing the missing funds, he accused her of invading his privacy. He said she was making the home stressful and preventing him from focusing on work. Throughout the conversation, he refused to look at the documents she held, insisting she was exaggerating the severity of the situation. The tension affected the children as well. Neil asked repeatedly why his father no longer arrived for school events or weekend practice sessions. Dia grew hesitant around Arvind, often hiding behind Kavita when he entered a room. Kavita could not offer the children an explanation because Arvind avoided all discussions about where he was going or when he would return. His absence became normalized to the point where the children stopped expecting him at dinner. During this same period, Arvind's communication with Ria increased dramatically. Their early brief messages had developed into continuous exchanges throughout the day. Arvind visited her near her campus under the pretext of having long breaks between client routes. He told her he lived alone, that his marriage had ended years earlier, and that the remaining ties were only legal technicalities. Ria accepted these explanations. Arvind maintained his well-kept uniform, the premium sedan, and the appearance of a man constantly in demand. Nothing in his behavior toward her indicated the financial or marital instability unfolding at home. The turning point came when Kavita found a restaurant receipt in Arvind's jacket. It listed 2 entrees and a bottle of wine from a place she had never been to. When she asked him who the second meal was for, he responded immediately with frustration, saying she was making his life miserable. The argument escalated quickly. Kavita pressed him to explain the expenses and the change in his schedule. Arvind avoided every question and ended the discussion by grabbing his keys and leaving the house abruptly. He did not return for the next 48 hours. He ignored her calls and sent only one message stating he needed time to think. When he finally came back, he informed her without discussion that he would be staying elsewhere for a while. He did not provide an address. Kavita noticed he had already removed several shirts, personal hygiene items, and 2 pairs of shoes from the bedroom. He had relocated them gradually over the previous weeks. Arvind spoke briefly with the children, telling them he would be busy for a while, then left again before Kavita could ask further questions. From that moment on, his visits became infrequent and transactional. He arrived only to pick up items he claimed were needed for work. He no longer sat at the dining table or engaged in conversation. Every visit was short, controlled, and executed in uniform as if he were stopping by between assignments. Kavita understood then that Arvind had begun living a second life away from the home. She did not know where he was staying or with whom, but she recognized the pattern. Whatever relationship he had entered into had already taken priority over his family. After Arvind reduced his presence at the family home to brief, scripted visits, he shifted almost all of his personal belongings into the small studio he had rented near Lincoln Park. The studio was sparsely furnished, containing only a mattress, a folding table, and a small wardrobe. To Rhea he presented this move as a professional decision. He told her he had taken a career step, that he needed to live closer to the company garage to handle early routes. She accepted this explanation because it aligned with the image he had maintained since the beginning, a man with increasing responsibilities and limited time. When Arvind stayed at Rhea's apartment, he framed it as temporary, claiming extended shifts or last-minute airport runs left him too exhausted to drive back to the studio. This narrative was reinforced by his arrival in the premium sedan. He pulled up outside her building with the confidence of ownership, even though the vehicle belonged to his client and not to him. He walked into her apartment still in uniform, reinforcing the impression that he was constantly active and needed only brief hours of rest before resuming work. However, inconsistencies began to appear quickly. Rhea noticed that Arvind's claimed exhaustion often did not match his behavior. On days he said he had been driving for 14 hours, he was alert, talkative, and showed no signs of fatigue. On days he said he needed to spend hours on vehicle maintenance, the sedan appeared spotless and unused. Messages arrived on his phone at unusual hours, and he consistently turned the screen away from her when checking them. When she asked what was going on, he replied that she was being overly emotional and did not understand his professional responsibilities. Financial instability added another layer of concern. Arvind relied heavily on credit cards for dinners, gifts, and hotel lounges where he met Rhea outside her campus. He had no savings, and the appearance of financial stability was manufactured entirely through borrowed money. When statements arrived at the studio's mailbox, he hid them in a drawer beneath mismatched socks and unopened envelopes. The situation escalated the afternoon a past due notice was mistakenly delivered to Rhea's address. She found the envelope among her own mail and opened it without hesitation, believing it was work-related. Instead, she discovered overdue balances, accumulated interest, and warnings regarding possible account closure. She had never seen his name attached to a residential mailing address. The discrepancy immediately drew her attention. Later that evening, she searched the drawers in the studio. She found receipts for jewelry purchased on credit, deferred rental notices, and multiple bank records showing overdraft fees over several consecutive months. None of these documents matched the image Arvind had presented. When he returned, she confronted him directly. His reaction was immediate panic. He said he had nowhere to go, that his wife had changed the locks, that his employer had threatened suspension. He framed himself as a man on the verge of losing everything unless she stood by him. When Rhea stepped back from him, he grabbed her arm not with overt aggression, but with a tightness that communicated desperation. He repeated that he had given up everything, and that she could not abandon him now. She pulled away and told him to leave for the night. He refused. Instead, he walked out to his car and slept inside it, sending long messages to her phone every hour until morning. In the days that followed, Arvind's behavior became intrusive. He appeared unannounced at Rhea's campus, approached her between classes, and left flowers at her door. He filled her voicemail with emotional messages, sometimes 3 or 4 in a row. Rhea began withdrawing from friends and avoided discussing the situation. Every time she attempted to create distance, Arvind reacted with heightened panic, insisting she was all he had left, framing her as the only remaining constant in his collapsing life. The situation shifted further when his supervisor called Rhea's apartment phone, asking why Arvind had missed multiple assigned shifts. Rhea realized immediately that the explanations Arvind had given her about work were fabricated. She understood he had been lying about more than his schedule. That same evening, Arvind appeared again outside her door, his eyes red, and insisted they needed to talk inside. Rhea opened the door only because she wanted to avoid a scene in the hallway. Arvind's knocking had grown louder, and she saw a neighbor step out of their unit and look toward her door. To prevent further attention, she allowed him inside and immediately regretted it. The moment the door closed, Arvind began pacing back and forth across the narrow living room. His speech was disorganized. He moved rapidly between blaming himself, blaming her, and blaming circumstances he claimed were outside his control. He wiped his face with his sleeve, then raised his voice unexpectedly. Ria kept her distance near the wall, trying to understand what he was saying. Arvind explained that Kavita had filed for support and that he was being bled dry. He said the transport company was targeting him with inconsistent shifts and that management wanted him out. None of this matched what Ria had heard when his supervisor called her apartment the previous day. She listened without interrupting at first, hoping he would calm down. Instead, his pacing intensified. He insisted he had sacrificed everything and that she was the only stable part of his life. Ria told him she could not help him manage problems he refused to be honest about. When she mentioned the debts, Arvind's tone shifted abruptly. He accused her of expecting him to look successful and said he had tried to maintain that appearance for her. He claimed she had pushed him into pretending. Ria denied it, telling him she had never asked for gifts he could not afford. The discussion escalated quickly, with both voices rising. Arvind began speaking over her, repeating that she didn't understand what he had given up. At one point, Ria attempted to walk toward the kitchen to retrieve her phone. Arvind stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His expression changed from distress to strangely calm. Ria managed to slip past him and reach the counter, but he followed closely. When she finally grabbed her phone, he gave a shaky smile and said she wouldn't call anyone because it would destroy him. His behavior became unpredictable. He alternated between clutching his head, breathing heavily, and approaching her again to say she was abandoning him just like everyone else. Ria threatened to call the police. Arvind froze, stared at her for several seconds, and whispered that she didn't mean it. She retreated to the bathroom and locked the door. From the other side, she heard him walking around the apartment, sometimes talking to himself, sometimes standing silently near the door. After several minutes, the apartment grew quiet, followed by the sound of the front door closing. Ria remained inside the bathroom longer to be sure he was gone. Hours later, she found a folded note pushed under the door. It said he would come back the next day and that they would fix everything. Ria read it twice, then left it on the kitchen counter without responding. She did not sleep that night, listening for footsteps in the hallway. The following evening, Arvind returned earlier than she expected. He knocked gently at first, then more insistently when she did not answer. Ria remained quiet, but as another tenant entered the hallway with grocery bags, she felt pressure to avoid drawing attention. She reluctantly opened the door a few inches. Arvind used that moment to step inside before she could stop him. The argument reignited immediately. Ria told him firmly that he needed to leave, that she could not be responsible for his debts or his instability. Arvind raised his voice, saying she couldn't abandon him now when he had lost everything. He followed her into the kitchen as she tried to create distance. The tension escalated when Ria reached again for her phone. Arvind grabbed her wrist tightly, preventing her from picking it up. Ria pulled her arm free and stepped back. Her hand landed on the heavy metal spice grinder she had washed earlier. She held it without thinking. Arvind stepped toward her again. Ria swung the grinder in a single motion. The first strike hit his temple, causing him to stagger and fall to his knees. The second blow dropped him completely. Blood spread quickly across the tile. Ria froze for a moment, then reacted instinctively. She dragged Arvind toward the rear stairwell, hoping to stage a fall. The effort left smear marks that she could not clean. When a neighbor opened their door briefly, she stopped and pressed herself against the wall until the neighbor went back inside. She abandoned the attempt and hurried back to her apartment. Inside, she washed the grinder in the sink, turning the water to full pressure. Then she sat on the floor in the dark, listening for sirens or footsteps. None came. The apartment remained silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The first call to 911 came from a tenant on the third floor who used the rear stairwell each morning to reach the parking area. At approximately 7:10 a.m., she found Irvin lying motionless on the landing between two floors. He was positioned partly on his side, with one arm bent unnaturally beneath him. Blood had pooled under his head in a pattern inconsistent with a forward fall, and his shoes were angled in a way that suggested he had been placed there rather than having tumbled. Paramedics arrived within minutes. After a brief assessment, they informed responding officers that the head trauma did not match a fall down the stairs. The wounds were concentrated and sharply defined, not dispersed as seen in typical stair-related impacts. Police immediately secured the stairwell and began canvassing the floor. Officers knocked on doors, asking if anyone had heard unusual sounds. When they reached Ria's apartment, she opened the door slowly. She appeared visibly shaken, held onto the doorframe for balance, and said she had slept through the night and had heard nothing unusual. Officers noticed her hands trembling and asked if she required medical attention. She declined. However, while speaking to her, an officer observed faint streaks along the floor outside her door. The streaks were thin, smeared, and lighter than the pool of blood downstairs, indicating they had been partially cleaned or diluted. They were not footprints but parallel marks consistent with a dragged object. The officers documented the streaks, photographed the hallway, and expanded the secured perimeter to include Ria's doorway. Detectives arrived shortly after and requested access to the building's hallway cameras. Footage from the previous evening showed Irvin taking the elevator to Ria's floor at approximately 7:48 p.m. He stood outside her door for several seconds, then entered the frame again, pacing briefly in the hallway before moving out of view. No footage showed him leaving the floor by elevator or stairs. This meant he had remained on that level until his body was discovered. Crime scene technicians examined the stairwell carefully. They found no blood above the landing where Irvin was lying. Typically, a fall from higher steps leaves a trail of blood droplets or transfer marks as the body hits multiple surfaces. The absence of any such indicators strongly suggested that the body had not traveled down the stairs naturally. The technicians also noted that the landing's dust pattern had been disrupted in a narrow path leading from the direction of Ria's apartment. When detectives entered Ria's kitchen with her consent, they observed sink water tinted pink, indicating recent rinsing of blood. On the counter they located micro-sized metallic fragments. These appeared consistent with chips from a heavy metal object. Technicians collected the fragments for analysis. They also recovered a spice grinder from the drying rack. The grinder had small dents on its edge, and a field reagent test indicated the presence of trace blood, even though it had been washed. Phone record analysis presented a detailed timeline. Between 6:20 p.m. and 7:40 p.m., Irvin called Ria 6 times, leaving 3 voicemails. One voicemail, timestamped minutes before the attack, captured ambient hallway sounds and Irvin saying he was right here and needed her to open the door. These recordings established that he had approached willingly and without aggressive behavior. When detectives confronted Ria with the growing list of inconsistencies, she stated that she acted out of fear, claiming Irvin had become unstable and that she felt threatened. Detectives documented her statement but noted contradictions. She had no visible defensive injuries, no torn clothing, and no evidence of a struggle. The drag marks contradicted her claim of being too frightened to take action afterward. Her explanation for the diluted sink water she said she had washed dishes did not align with the metallic fragments or the blood reagent results. The forensic report further undermined her statements. The skull fractures were consistent with 2 controlled, forceful impacts delivered at close range, not with accidental contact from a fall or defensive collision. The indentation pattern matched the dented edge of the spice grinder. The evidence formed a coherent sequence. Irvin had approached Ria's apartment attempting reconciliation, entered or was allowed inside, and an altercation had occurred leading to deliberate blows. The subsequent staging of the body on the stairwell, coupled with attempts to clean the weapon and the hallway streaks, suggested calculated actions after the injury. By the end of the day, detectives classified the case as intentional homicide rather than an unexplained fall. Following the forensic findings and the inconsistencies in Ria's account, detectives moved quickly to formalize charges. She was arrested without incident and transported to the county detention facility. During processing, investigators briefed the prosecutor's office on the physical evidence, digital records, and statements collected over the previous 48 hours. Based on this information, prosecutors filed charges of second-degree murder and evidence tampering. The evidence tampering charge was supported by the washed grinder, the diluted blood in the sink, and the drag marks leading from her apartment to the stairwell. During the initial hearing, prosecutors outlined their theory. Rhea had multiple opportunities to call for help but chose concealment instead. They pointed out that she had washed the weapon, attempted to stage the body in a way that mimicked an accidental fall, and misled neighbors when questioned. According to the prosecution, these actions demonstrated purposeful decisions after the injury occurred. The judge denied bail, citing the seriousness of the charges and the calculated nature of the cleanup attempts. As the trial approached, both sides reviewed extensive documentation. Prosecutors compiled Irvin's phone activity, showing messages and missed calls in the hour before he was injured. They also presented the voicemail in which Irvin said he was right here, which placed him calmly outside her apartment moments before the violence. Crime lab technicians prepared reports linking the dents on the spice grinder to the fractures in Irvin's skull. The building's surveillance footage established the timeline clearly. Irvin entered Rhea's floor and did not leave on his own. The defense focused on portraying Rhea as overwhelmed and frightened by Irvin's emotional instability. They argued she had been under sustained pressure from his unexpected appearances, late-night calls, and attempts to insert himself into her daily routine. They described her actions as those of a woman who felt cornered and acted impulsively in fear. However, this approach faced immediate challenges. Witness testimony established that Irvin had displayed emotional distress but no physical aggression toward anyone, including Rhea. Irvin's supervisor testified that Irvin had recently missed shifts and appeared disorganized, but never hostile. Kavita described his behavior in the months before he left the family home. She said he had become unreliable and withdrawn but had never been violent. Neighbors who encountered him in the hallway noted he seemed tense and upset but not threatening. Detectives added that Rhea showed no signs of defensive injury and that the scene lacked indicators of a struggle. During cross-examination, prosecutors emphasized the lack of any attempt to call 911. They questioned Rhea about why she washed the grinder if she had been acting out of fear. Her responses focused on confusion and panic, but prosecutors argued these explanations did not align with the methodical steps she took to drag the body, clean the kitchen, and return to her apartment. The lack of blood outside the staged area, combined with the diluted water in the sink, strengthened the prosecution's narrative that the actions were calculated. The trial lasted 9 days. Each day focused on a different component of the case: digital records, forensic analysis, statements, and surveillance footage. By the end, the sequence of events was clear to the jury. Irvin had approached the apartment attempting reconciliation, an argument escalated, and Rhea struck him twice with the heavy grinder. The subsequent attempts to conceal his death weighed heavily against her. The jury deliberated for several hours before returning a unanimous verdict of guilty on both counts. The judge sentenced Rhea to 24 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 16. She showed little reaction as the sentence was read. Following the conviction, investigators notified Kavita formally. She arranged Irvin's funeral quietly, without public statements. She declined all media inquiries, requesting privacy for her children. The case file closed with a final summary noting that personal illusions about wealth, relationships, and identity had shaped every stage of the tragedy. Irvin's efforts to appear successful had fractured his family, and Rhea's attempt to maintain her own image had ended behind locked doors, leaving both lives without the futures they tried to construct.